can see we're all taking the opportunity to pimp out our various bits and pieces. So, and this is a really good one to share with you. I was asked to do a book launch in Western Australia by the editors of this book, which was produced over East. I've got a chapter in it on religion and cross-cultural, interreligious dialogue in Australia. It's a book which is edited by Andrew Jakubowicz and Christina Ho, but the authors come from a range of different backgrounds. So you've got people who are heads of NGOs, people who've come from service provider backgrounds, you've even got some politicians, some policymakers, government people, as well as academics who've written chapters for this book. So it's a really interesting, eclectic book. And the commentary on the back of it talks about how this is evidence, basically, in a world where countries are retreating from the concept of multiculturalism because they see multiculturalism as having failed, that this is evidence of successful multiculturalism, the ways in which multiculturalism has worked in Australia. I won't go through any of the table of contents or anything, but I'll leave a copy of the book here for people to have a squizzy at, and there are order forms, and it's quite a reasonably priced book for Australian books. It's $35. So if you like those, please feel free. Thank you.
And just as we're talking, if anybody does want one of the executive summaries of that research that Farida was talking about, I have some copies here. Oh. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm pretty sure we have a lot more in the other office. So. But the whole research is on the MMRC website also. It's all accessible there. Or the Settlement Council of Australia's website. The full research is there. So let's start. We're going to start with Emanuela Sala from the University of Western Australia. And the title of her research is The Diverse Italian Communities in Australia, Settlement Issues and Intra-Diaspora Knowledge Transfer.
Thank you.
Bottom on the right.
F5. Very top left. Yeah. No, from the beginning, yeah.
So first of all, thank you for allowing me to present my work today. And it's also good to see some familiar faces here who I used to work with. So today my presentation will be a little bit different because I'm not focusing on issues for refugees or humanitarian entrants, but I'll be focusing on an established migrant community here in Perth. So there's 3 aims to my presentation. The first is to chart the diversity of Italian migration in Perth. The second is to compare settlement issues between post-war migrants and new Italian migrants here. And then I will end the discussion by highlighting a form of support that is called intra-diaspora knowledge transfer. And I will draw on the findings of my PhD research that I'm currently working on, and also an article by Baltzar and Pike. So Italians are one of the largest and oldest non-English speaking migrant groups in Australia. In WA, the 2011 census tallied 3.8% of the total population as identifying themselves as having Italian ancestry. And currently, Italians and their descendants make up the largest group of non-English speaking migrant groups in WA. So Italian migration to Australia reaches back to the early 1800s and occurred in distinct waves. The early 1800s, the pre-Second World War, post-war, recent, post-70s, and what we call the new migration, so that's post-2000, and that comprises primarily of working holiday youth and 457 visa holders. So, as such, Italians played an important role in the major developments of Australia's colonised history, including early European settlement, the gold rush period, post-war developments, and more recently the knowledge economy, with highly skilled migration from Italy. And these waves have been shaped by parallel economic and political events in Italy that generated push and pull motivations for immigration. And the most recent influence is the impact of the global financial crisis, which has generated unemployment rates in Italy of up to 12%. So now I'd like to briefly discuss the three main waves of Italian migration to Australia. So the most significant wave is the post-war influx. And these arrivals were mainly labourers with limited formal education who sent remittances to support their native households in Italy. They arrived through chain migration based on kinship and village ties, and their migration project can be defined as a family economic strategy to provide a better life for their children. It is important to note that during this time, Australia's post-war White Australia policy cast Italian migrants as non-white, a threat to Australian ways of life, and they were consequently initially met by racism and discrimination. So the dismantling of the Immigration Restriction Act of the 70s saw the removal of any official criteria based on notions of colour and race, but coincided with increased restrictions and a reduction in overall immigration numbers. So together with improved economic conditions in Italy, there was a substantial decrease in Italian migration from the 70s until very recently. So in contrast to earlier waves, the post-70s cohort comprised mainly of professionals from the middle classes, migrating for career, lifestyle and or love. So the new cohort of Italian migrants to Australia is of a considerably different nature than previous waves. Fueled by the economic downturn in Europe, young people are arriving in Australia on working holiday and 457 visas in search of employment opportunities. And recently, the size of this group has risen dramatically. I won't go through all the numbers. If you're interested, we can speak later. So these young and often single migrants are highly mobile and technologically literate, and they appear to be very much transnational people. And while they're rich in human, social and cultural capital, they are not often wealthy due to their life stage, and they seek support from established migrant communities by activating their networks to find accommodation and employment. And this is a point that I'll speak about later. So, this is second generation. So if we accept that diaspora identity is not defined by birthplace alone, we can add two further cohorts made up of second generation Australian born. The post-war, that are described in the literature as having hyphenated identities and being proud of both of their dual identities, so the Italian and Australian, and the post-70s second generation who also have hyphenated identities, but they appear to be bicultural and also much more transnational than the previous cohort. And of course there are also third and fourth and sometimes fifth generations, but I won't go into all of them. So in describing the Italian diaspora in Australia, it's important to acknowledge that this is not a homogenous group. Those who identify as being of Italian background are differentiated by links that are shaped by regional and national ties, also gender, class, age, generation, place of settlement, and also time of migration. So this heterogeneity has led to the formation over time of many Italian diasporas in Australia. So this brings me to the next point on community life and social support. So due to time constraints, I'm not going to focus specifically on the issues faced by Italian migrants upon arrival, as I'm sure they're well known amongst the audience today, but rather I'd like to focus on settlement needs, that how they've been met in these diverse communities, focusing specifically on the post-war cohort and then the more recent arrivals. So the post-war cohort set up many Italian and regional clubs in WA, which are called physical forms of support. So a range of factors contributed to their development in the earliest years of settlement. Difficulties in English and prejudice from the wider community encouraged migrants to bond together in clubs, which offered mutual support and understanding. Baldassar refers to these clubs as the community lifeblood of the post-war group. So in the late 50s, the Italian club offered family-oriented social activities such as Christmas parties and dances, and also English classes for their children, or the ability to watch sport or participate in sport. And all of these activities brought this cohort together and helped foster a sense of community support and understanding. And typically the migrants would go to these clubs with their children on a weekly basis, usually on a weekend, to catch up with other co-nationals. But of course these clubs weren't only a form of support. It's important to also acknowledge the role of the Catholic Church and professional associations, and the domestic support within the family as well is very important. So this is a picture taken in 1968 at the Italian club. I'll just briefly read a quote here, which is quite interesting. We could not understand the Australian mentality, and they definitely could not understand us in every way. Food, drink, behaviour, the way you joke and the way that you express yourself. When you don't know the language, and that's the biggest handicap we had, we were bored. During the week at work, we didn't know how to express ourselves properly. It is such a pressure. You boil and the bulb pops. So before that happened, we used to get together on the weekend. So the membership of the Italian club grew up to 7,000 members in the 70s. Since the 70s, the numbers have decreased as more and more members left to start their own regional clubs. So there are 24 of these clubs in Perth at the moment. For example, the Sicilian Club or the Buster Club and different clubs like that. And they are small in size, ranging from 1 member to several hundred members. I thought it was interesting that 1 member. So this is a picture of the Italian club taken this year in May. So as the post-war migrants are aging, the question is, what is the future of these clubs? This is a question that's often raised by many of this cohort. As their children, the second generation, are generally not interested in attending. All of the second generation people that I've spoken to only attend with their parents on events like Mother's Day or Father's Day, never on a weekly basis. And of course there's the issue that the second generation did not actually migrate. They're Australian born, first generation Australians. But that's not to say that they do not identify with their Italian background. I'll come back to the role that the second generation plays in providing settlement and support for newer migrants later. So the next type of support is virtual forms, and this is for the new migrants that have come in the last 10 years or so mainly. So in contrast to the post-war migrants who use a physical space such as clubs, the new Italian youth are using virtual spaces to obtain support from other migrants who have been there and done that, so to speak. So there exists many Facebook groups that are called virtual forms of support. And one of them is the Italians in Perth, WA, and this is a group that I've been following for my research. So to date there are over 1,000 members, and this grows from 10 to 20 new members a week. However, it's difficult to tell how many are still in Perth or are in Italy waiting to arrive that have connected to this group prior to coming to Australia. So this is just a screenshot of what the page looks like. So the people ask questions and responses are made below. So what type of support is offered in this virtual space? The major one is visa advice. So some of the people almost act like migration agents, although they say we're not qualified agents, but what they're offering is their own experiences and their own, I guess, how they've gone about things in Australia as a way to support new migrants. Friendship as well, often physical get-togethers are organised in this space, and interestingly enough, various dinners have now been organised at the Italian club. So it might be in fact that this new generation might be the future of the clubs, because the second generation isn't interested in attending. Also, other technical advice is offered, Medicare, rules for rent, obtaining driver's license and so on. And also pre-trip information. So as I said before, they connect to this group before arriving to Australia to find out information about visa accommodation and so on. It's also important to mention that through this virtual space, often referrals are made to more formal associations as well. So this brings me to the last point that I want to discuss on intra-diaspora knowledge transfer. So as intended by the skilled migration policy, the new arrivals are young, highly skilled and relatively self-sufficient, yet they call on links to older migrant communities for information and support. My data shows that the second generation in particular provides assistance to the new migrants in the form of pre-trip, settlement and future goals information. And Baldassar and Pike define the term this intra-diaspora knowledge transfer, these 3 steps. So the first stage, in order to identify contacts and information about Australia, would be new migrants seek pre-trip information from different sources. For example, regional clubs or associations, or sometimes they even might make a cold call to a professional contact in the hope of seeking employment. However, anecdotal evidence suggests that this strategy is less successful, and it is primarily the networks with these older established communities that reap rewards. Sometimes prospective migrants have relatives living in Australia, or if none exist, a family member in Italy is located who has ties to kin living here. So my data shows that several second-generation Italian Australians have been contacted by these new migrants in order to seek support, and have been and they themselves have provided information regarding to visa, employment and housing. And the contacts established often leads to arrival and settlement information as the second step in the form of cheap accommodation. Hence, the second generation can provide housing as well as emotional support during the first weeks in Australia. They become like a family for the new migrants and are indeed a first base for them upon arrival. More importantly, they provide a way to combat isolation in the first few months. Employment is often sought through these contacts, and several of my informants have provided work for the new migrants in family-run businesses and also through other family and friend connections. So the last form of knowledge transfer is attainment of future goals. And this information usually relates to permanent employment and sponsorships. And my data shows that sometimes links to these, to family businesses here in Australia can guarantee more permanent employment for them. However, for most, finding appropriate sponsorship to convert their working holiday visas to 457 visa is a major challenge, and often they have to return back to Italy because their working holiday visa ends after a year. So just to conclude, as I've demonstrated, changing times have led to different types of support in the Italian community here in Perth, from physical to virtual forms. And both forms are assisting the Italian community by providing assistance, support and understanding. Further, intra-diaspora knowledge transfer should be considered as another form of support amongst the Italian community, which has the effect of absorbing the settlement needs of new migrants, as well as enabling successful integration into the employment market. Therefore, this type of knowledge transfer could be considered in the planning of both skilled migration and multicultural social policy. I think I will leave it here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. So our next presenter is Joan Moniotis from Edmund Rice Centre in Mirrabooka, and the topic that Joe's going to talk to us about is youth and community programs, models of best practice. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everybody for being here and listening. It was good to listen to some of the research earlier on, which hopefully will sort of back up what I'm going to present today. And I'm the Youth Programs Coordinator at the Centre, and I'd just like to start by introducing Edmund Rice Centre. So Edmund Rice Centre is a place that offers a holistic approach to helping people in need, predominantly from culturally and linguistically diverse or CALD backgrounds. And they offer a range of services including English classes, computer classes, life skills, Room Together, etc., etc. It's basically any service that may be needed. We also have an Aboriginal children's program, so we do service the Aboriginal children and youth. And we have CALD and Aboriginal sports, arts and community programs. And we have a very comprehensive youth leadership program as well. So what I'll do now is sort of trace a brief history of the youth programs at the Centre. It started with the Refugee, Migrant and Aboriginal Youth Sports Program, and that was, we had a bus, we picked up kids, we took them to a place and we took them home. We had a squad of the month, and that was quite successful, and that led to a youth leadership program that started in 2006. The youth leaders began to sort of help with community programs and the like at events and events organised by the Centre in 2007. And the senior leadership group was formed in 2010, and we started to employ youth workers from the group, and they began to take ownership of the programs. In 2010, we launched the ERC Lions. That was a significant step in the evolution of the programs, because that was a completely unfunded program separate to what we were already funded to do. So obviously it relied a lot on youth leaders and volunteer support, and it extended, I guess, our model, which I'll sort of get to in more detail later. The senior leaders began to take over the coordination of the programs in late 2010 and 2011, and in 2012 they became a much more sort of structured and stable youth staff, and that's when we Okay, that's okay. They took over the local, the Northwest Metro project, and that's when we launched the local parks multi-sport program. So at the moment we're seeing over 200 kids a week in our various programs, and that's because of that sort of expansion over the years. Okay, so I guess the purpose of this presentation is to sort of go through what it takes to get to the level that we've been able to get to, and the embodiment of what a person needs to have, what a person needs to be to get there. So it sort of backs up all the research at the grassroots level, hopefully. So I'll talk a little bit about my journey and how I got to where I am. I was from a well-off family. I had everything I needed. My parents provided materially everything I could have hoped for, but I had limited life experience, and socially I wasn't that well adjusted and had anxiety and all of that sort of stuff. But I did do school, university, all of that. So my background was in science. I went through Bachelor of Science in Physics, Chemistry and Maths. I did honours in Chem and a PhD in Chem. I moved out of home when I was 19. And I think that, to me, sort of led to a lot of soul searching, a lot of discovery, spiritual growth, martial arts. I increased my confidence and knowledge as I started to learn. What basically happened was that I went into a low, and either I had to get myself out, or because I was too proud to seek help. Coming from an Arabic background, you know, there's certain social taboos and things like that, and things like counselling and stuff. So I began to sort of catch on to this idea that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. It's a quote from Gandhi. And I went to volunteer, and I guess in that, I've written history and religion here for a reason. If you want to know people, their history and their religion are probably the two most important things that govern a person's life, on the whole, in general. So I volunteered at the Centre in 2006, employed part-time in 2007, and I've overseen the growth of the programs ever since. What I saw when I came into the industry, not coming from a youth work background or anything like that, was a lot of fear to sort of, you know, engage with people, a lot of sterile interactions, a lot of the humanness of an interaction was missing. Young people weren't being challenged, and people weren't committed to seeing things through. A lot of people moving on and things like that. They're just some of the things, and this presentation is not about everything. It's just about a snapshot of things that, you know, have gone on and that I've seen and that we've seen. So it's the collective journey of all the people that have come through the youth programs at the Centre, including our staff and everybody. So we talk about the ideals of the community servant, and these are sort of principles that govern what we do. They have to be the pillars and the rock of the community. They have to be the strongest people. They also have to strengthen themselves, have to do things that make themselves strong. They have to strengthen mind, body and spirit through those media. They have to have their feet on the ground. They have to be committed to seeing things through. One of the things that I sort of pride myself on, and the others do as well, the other workers, is that I'm the youth programs coordinator. I do 8 programs a week. So I'm engaged in 8 programs on the ground every week. They have to be a member of the community, and they have to be community minded. So I live in Kundula. People see me as I'm running, walking around. They know I'm a member of that community, and that helps. They have to accept and encourage criticism in all forms. and they have to be sure of who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. They have to be open and honest, and they hide nothing. And this has been a big one for me. Acquire knowledge of many things and then use that knowledge to inspire others. So seeking knowledge, bringing knowledge into yourself, having many skills or trying to acquire many skills is really, really important. And they have to be the embodiment of sacrifice, fearless and take risks when necessary, but be non-violent and compassionate as well. So all of those kind of qualities, and they have to help others to carry what they can't carry. And they have to share the journey of other people. So, the principles. So our programs are built on principles. So we have a high ideal at the top, and then